Hello, Canada Files viewers. This is Aidan Jonah, editor-in-chief of the Canada Files. I'm pleased to introduce a new series for the Canada Files YouTube channel. That is Canada and Palestine, the war against Zionism. We have the co-host of this new series. It's one and only, the controversial man, Laith Marouf, who is senior director with Free Palestine TV, and he's a broadcast law consultant with the Community Media Advocacy Center. Laith, thanks for joining the Canada Files.
Well, thank you for having me.
It's great. Well, we have so much to talk about, so I'm going to break down the format for people quickly, which is we'll start these shows with the situation in Palestine in the last 2 weeks, then, Canadian support for the Zionist entity. And then we get to how are Canadians opposing the Canadian government support for this Zionist entity, protests, etc. So let's get into it now. The situation in Palestine in these last 2 weeks. It's been constant chaos. Laith, take us through. What are the updates here?
Well, it's now 74 days, 76 days. I've lost count since the war on Gaza and the genocide there has started. In the last 2 weeks, we saw an increase of attacks by the Zionists on Palestinian civilian infrastructure. What used to be abnormal and would shock humanity, like the attacks on hospitals, became now a daily reality. Of course, we saw over the last week the abduction of over 1,000 civilians from inside Gaza by Israeli forces, mainly men and boys. We saw them being paraded in front of cameras, humiliated and stripped down. We saw them being forced to enact false situations with them carrying arms, and that got exposed with the videos being released from different angles showing the repetitive acting that the prisoners were required to do. Today, we also heard from many testimonies of those prisoners that came out of those mass arrests that happened. We heard about torture. We heard about rapes. We heard about murders happening. We heard even, of course, about prisoners being forcefully buried alive and crushed and then pulled out still alive with their bones crushed. And now, this becomes now the Abu Ghraib, the Guantanamo Bay situation has become a norm for the prisoners, Palestinian prisoners that are being captured by Israel. At the same time, the prisoners that are in Israeli jails in the West Bank are facing similar situations, mass attacks by the jailers, and Ben Gvir, the Israeli Minister of Internal Security, who is responsible for the jails, has instituted a policy of torture and cutting off all food and water and electricity on the prisoners inside the West Bank as a retaliation for the Palestinian resistance in Gaza. Today, we also heard about there was another attack on a hospital. I mentioned that earlier, how it's becoming now normal. It's the third attack in 3 days on different hospitals. And over the last 2 days, we heard attacks on the 2 different churches in Gaza, with the Pope coming out and calling it terrorism for the first time, calling what Israel is doing in Gaza as terrorism. So now we have a condemnation from much of the, Christian religious sects in the world, the Orthodox and the Catholics, both of them, churches condemning what's happening in Gaza. And this is just kind of in general. If we have more detailed questions that you want to ask about, I'm glad to respond to that. The numbers of dead is close to 20,000 now, and the numbers of injured are around 40,000. So we're talking about 1% of the population of Gaza being murdered, and at least 3% of the population being injured.
Okay, like thanks for that context. I think the question people would be curious about is the state of the Palestinian resistance under all this Israeli fire and increasing desperation. How are they holding up?
Well, the Zionists haven't been able to conduct any military victories in Gaza. They have been able to kill and maim and destroy much of the province. You know, close to 80 some odd percent of the buildings and structures in Gaza have been destroyed. But we keep on seeing every day videos coming out of the resistance showing their direct engagement with the Zionists and the destruction of Zionist equipment and the killing of Zionist soldiers. Just an hour ago, a few hours ago, the resistance in Gaza released a video, and it showed multiple attacks on Israeli armored vehicles and positions of Israeli military forces that are camped inside houses in the province, in the strip. Yesterday, we had a video that was probably the most shocking out of all those videos that came out of the resistance over the last 2.5 months, that included at the end of it sections that are clearly from a helmet camera of a Zionist soldier. It clearly an Israeli soldier was captured or killed, and his equipment were taken by the resistance. So this section of the video that was released yesterday included the dragging out of all these destroyed Israeli tanks and military bulldozers, at least 10 of them. And then another section that showed the results of an attack by the resistance on a group of Israeli soldiers. So multiple Israeli soldiers dead and or injured, being treated and put on stretchers to be pulled out of the confrontation line. So now we have clearly confirmations that the Israelis are not able to hold ground, that all their military equipment is destroyed if and when it stops moving or goes too deep into the populated areas of Gaza. The other thing that is clear now after 2.5 months is if you look at the names and titles and ages of Israeli dead that the Israeli military keeps on releasing on a daily basis. They're releasing the names of 4 to 6 dead soldiers a day, but practically all of them since the beginning of this war have been only names of officers that are dead. And if we look at these, titles and names and ages, we see that we're now seeing Israeli colonels and major colonels that are being killed that are in their mid-20s in age. What does this mean? That means that the majority of the Israeli elite officers corps that were captured or killed in the October 7th attack, because Hamas attacked 11 Israeli bases and captured or killed all their officer corps, and similarly for the Mossad and Shin Bet bases that are around Gaza, and the base of the elite of the police in Israel, with the what they call the Gaza battalion, kind of the SWAT. So the older, more experienced corps was killed and or injured in October 7th of the Israeli military. The Israeli military had to raise the position of those under them. And over the last 2 months, we keep on seeing the age of those who are the officers that are killed by the resistance in Gaza going down. You will notice that in November, the average age for these officers was in their 30s. Now the average age for these officers is in their mid-20s. So that means now they're having a huge problem with experience. When you have a 20-somewhat-year-old being in charge of a whole battalion, that indicates that you've lost all those who have the experience, and now you're reverting to a younger and younger cadre, and that the cadre doesn't have experiences, and they're becoming more weaker as groups, and their connectivity and their ability to respond to the situation on the ground. So that's a very important indicator that the resistance in Gaza is succeeding. And and if the Israelis are only releasing the names of officers killed, that gives us two possibilities. Either the resistance in Gaza is so smart, is so targeted, that it's able to kill the officers of every battalion that enters the battleground, and therefore forcing their foot soldiers to run away with no leadership, or that the Israelis are actually hiding the names of every non-officer that dies on the battlefield. I personally think that it seems that the Palestinian resistance is actually very successful as targeting officers on the ground once they come in with their troops.
Thanks, Laith. So now I think one of the big shifts of the last few weeks has been the actions of Ansarallah, Yemeni resistance. We've seen them targeting Israeli cargo ships, really what you could say is a blockade on those kind of ships. And take us through this. How did this start, and what has the impact of this been on the Zionist colony?
Well, first, it's very important to say that Yemen is actually enacting and delivering on its responsibility under the Genocide Convention to intervene to stop the perpetration of genocide. This is a responsibility on every state once genocide is clearly being conducted. And so Yemen is now the only country in the world that is delivering on that responsibility. And so what did the Yemenis do? They said any shipping, whether it's owned by Israelis or not, that is going to Israeli ports, will not be allowed to pass through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, to go from the Arabian Sea to the Red Sea to Israeli ports in the Gulf of Aqaba, or to the Suez Canal to the Mediterranean ports of the Zionist colony. And they delivered on that threat immediately, sending messages to all the shipping companies in the world. And those companies that didn't, and ships that didn't respond to their calls to not go through the Bab el-Mandeb, they, attacked or confiscated, as happened over the last 2 weeks, at least 6 different ships targeted and confiscated, and the last of them being 2 days ago, when for the first time since the production of ballistic land-to-sea missiles, a nation has used those, and that is Yemen, successfully to hit a moving target and hit 2 ships that were going to Israeli ports, one of them being an oil tanker, the other being a container ship. What I mean by that is that not the United States, not the Soviet Union, not Russia, not any country until now, even the ones that have those weapons, has used them in a live situation and hit a moving target. So Yemen now has this technology. In response to these Yemeni actions, much of the shipping going to Israel practically stopped. There's none going actually to Israel from through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. And then we started hearing all these different shipping companies stopping all their routes through the Red Sea and diverting them towards Cape of Good Hope in South Africa, and through that to the Mediterranean, from there to the Mediterranean, I mean. And then we started hearing companies like the Hong Kong-based, one of the largest Chinese shipping companies based in Hong Kong, saying that they have suspended all shipping to and from a Zionist colony. And I think that triggered, once that it's reached that stage, it triggered the Americans and the Zionists to force the rest of the shipping in the world to stop going through the Red Sea. You see, Yemen didn't threaten global trade through the Red Sea. Yemen said it will not allow any shipping going from and to the Zionist colony through its waters. And because the US was and the West were so not happy about that and wanted to raise the stakes to force, to maybe get their own populations to feel the pain that the Zionists were feeling, and to get more people on their side, they ordered their own companies, their own Western shipping companies, to completely stop, passing through Bab el-Mandeb. So this is basically a tax on the world, a punishment on the world by the West itself, to make sure that the Zionist colony is not left alone in this situation. And remember, the Zionist colony was threatening to attack Yemen as a response to this. And what do we have instead of that? We have now a global, quote unquote, global coalition led by the United States, a coalition led by the United States to kind of counter the Sana'a government, the Yemeni government, in these waters around Yemen. And two things we need to notice from this coalition. These 11 countries, not one country that actually has any beachfront on the Red Sea joined this coalition. So now Egypt, who is the main, probably the main country that is getting harmed by the blockade by the Ansarullah in Yemen, other than the Zionist colony. The only other country that's mainly being harmed by this is Egypt, and it refused to join this coalition. Jordan, which has ports on the Aqaba, also Gulf, didn't join. The Saudis didn't join. Eritrea didn't join. Djibouti didn't join. Somalia didn't join. And of course, the Zionist colony itself didn't join. So that's indicators. Those are very important indicators that the United States hasn't any support in the Red Sea waters for its actions that are happening. And the other thing is that all those who joined this coalition are the old colonial powers, the United States, France, Italy, the UK, and the Netherlands, and then added to it the Bahrain, the only Arabic country there. Bahrain has a population of 250,000 citizens and 1 million foreign workers. And it's basically a parking lot for American ships, military ships. It has the largest Navy base outside the United States in the world. And the other one is the Seychelles Islands in the Indian Ocean across from Madagascar. And the Seychelles has 9 dinghies, basically, in their navy. So ultimately, this is a new colonial coalition to face Yemen. And this is going to be a very interesting standoff. And we can talk about it more. I'll let you ask me some questions because I feel I just ranted there for a while.
It's all good. It's all good. And you transitioned right into where we were going to go next, which is, of course, Canadian support for the Zionist colony, because Canada is very much part of Operation Prosperity Guardian, which is a truly ironic name. So there's from Bill Blair, the Minister of National Defense, said that there's three staff officers that are going to be supporting it: 2 planners, 1 intelligence analyst. I was talking with Martad, and we posted a longer tweet and on Telegram about it. It's very much strikes as Canada leading the logistics and planning. Now, this operation is very much, it's a maritime war, let's be real here, and it's against Yemen and Iran. It's against Yemen and Iran. Very much, Israel is desperate to target Iran because Iran is the big backer of Palestinian resistance. And on a personal note, I always find it ironic when some tendencies seek to kind of hide the role that Iran plays in terms of backing the resistance. You might not love how it is domestically, but it's a firm reality that they are backing it, and there's a reason why Israel and the U.S. hate the Iranian government so much. It's because their main Zionist colony is under severe threat because Iran is there and it won't accept Zionism and its cancerous effects in the region. And what's very notable, there's a tweet from Spectator Index. Bloomberg reports that the U.S. and allies are considering military strikes against Houthi quote unquote rebels in Yemen, which really confirms that it's a war. They can call it defensive all they want, but it's not defensive. This is a war. This is brutal retaliation against Ansar Allah for standing with Palestine. And Ansar Allah's demand is very clear: end the genocide on Palestine. So they're not asking for America to lay down its arms and stop doing everything around the world. They're demanding one specific thing, and the U.S. they're such rabid colonial countries that they're not going to give up on their very own colonial entity in the region. So now we have this situation of massive chaos, and what I'm curious to see is going to be how Yemeni Canadians haven't been the most vocal, but I wonder how they're gonna respond to this. I don't think they're gonna be happy. And I mean, I think Palestinian Canadians, I think you can already get a sense of what they're gonna be feeling about this. They're not gonna be happy.
Yeah, look, the Canadian involvement in this war on Yemen clearly should help radicalize and instigate more actions in Canada against the genocide in Gaza and the involvement of the Canadian government and the Canadian media in aiding and abetting this genocide. So, it's one thing for Canada to send weapons to the Zionists. It's another to be directly involved in the continuation of this genocide through a military action. Okay. And so maybe in the last few weeks, we saw these occupations of Canadian military manufacturers that are sending weapons to the Zionist colony. Well, now it is time then to directly confront the Canadian military forces in Canadian territory. What I mean by that is that the blockades should now move to block the movement in and out of Canadian bases and Navy bases and so forth, because we have this direct involvement if Canadians really wish to stop the Canadian government from participating in the genocide directly. The other thing that I would say is that if I was in Yemen and as in charge of military actions, and I see that the American coalition attacks the Yemeni territory or hits targets on Yemeni territory, I would personally, my first response will be to hit Canadian ships if they are involved. Because if Canada is openly saying that it is going to be responsible for this coordination and targeting and so forth, then they should be the optimal primary target of responses from Yemen. Let the Canadian
in terms of the Canadians have so far, the military has said that they aren't going to have ships. They aren't going to have ships right now. That's what they're saying. So I should be clear about that.
Well, this is probably a smart thing, because definitely they would be the number one target if they had ships. by leading this coalition this way. I don't know if I would believe them, because I know that there's at least constantly one or two Canadian Coast Guard ships or Navy ships that are somewhere in the region. So let's see if the tracking websites can tell us where currently Canadian ships are. We saw them also being involved in the buildup of hostilities in the Taiwan Strait a few months ago. So I don't doubt the possibility that Canada can directly be involved with naval pieces in this confrontation. But let's say this war, actually the United States delivers on this threat and attacks Yemen through these naval ships that are there, this coalition of 30 somewhat ships that are now assembled in the Gulf of Aden, closer to the Somali shores. It's clear that Yemen can hit these ships, and it's clear that one or two ships are going to sink immediately. And it's clear also that Yemen will not need to, for instance, sink the aircraft carrier that is there. All it has to do is sink a few of the destroyers that have air defenses around that aircraft carrier, and you'll see all these Western ships carrying back into safety of the Indian Ocean, because they will be easy targets. The Yemenis have these air-to-sea missiles that can go over 300 kilometers, and they have drones. They have drone submarines, drone ships, and they can take them down. And look at this military battle that we're living right now, and how this is going to be written about for hundreds of years later. Okay, a group of 20 somewhat thousand fighters in the extermination camp of Gaza, besieged for a decade and a half, have withstood the attack and the might of not only Israel, but the whole Western imperial order for now 70 somewhat days. They've fought them to a standstill. Can you imagine this? Forget even the defeat of NATO in Ukraine. There is more of a symmetry there between Russian capabilities and NATO's capabilities. We're talking about a guerrilla organization, guerrilla fighters in a death camp, concentration extermination camp, fighting the empire to a standstill. And now, if this war in Yemen is triggered the way that the West wants to trigger it, we will see the most destitute, the poorest country on this planet that has been under war for 10 years with a genocide of close to 500,000 civilians, sink the America's carriers and the best of its Navy technology. It's going to be a whipping. I mean, if I was an American general, I would be actually furious at my politicians for putting me in this situation before it even happened, because it's clear that what is going to happen. The United States is going to have its naval power humiliated by Yemen if it dares to attack Yemen. And if I'm a general in this Navy and the Western navies, I'll be like, what the hell are you doing to us? You're only going to hasten the collapse of our military deterrence.
All right, so now let's shift gears a little bit. You have Zionist MP Anthony Housefather and other Zionist MPs now calling for a show trial to coerce university and college presidents to crack down on Palestine organizing. So Canada has very much been keeping an eye on this. Housefather has seemingly been the main one speaking up about this, even before he was attempting to organize it through Parliament. He was calling on influential Zionist donors to cut donations and slash donations to universities and colleges where there was Palestine liberation organizing. You saw, we both obviously saw these committee hearings in the United States where they were grilling the university presidents, and then now they're trying to do repetition of this. And it's very much, in my view, with Housefather, it's because he understands how much there's a hatred of Zionism in Canada, and understandably so. So he knows the Canadian government, if they led the targeting of the university students in Canada, you would have organizing at the scale of anti-Vietnam War protests. That would trigger a major anti-imperialist radicalization. That's the kind of thing that might trigger people to question everything on China and other issues. That's how bad it could get for them, which is why they are desperate for the university college presidents to do it for them by proxy. Now, of course, Housefather has and these other MPs have sent a series of questions, which are, let's be real here, they're threats. They can call them questions all they want. It's the same way that how to put it this way, you can call a grenade an apple with an explosive. It's still going to blow someone up. You can ask these questions, which are very clearly indications of, hey, if you don't do what we want, we're going to make you suffer. It's a whole farce, but that's the whole imperial game, right? They have to appear democratic and yada 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 when they're not. Housefather really, one of the things that I found in that CBC interview he did around the 15th or 14th was he talked about hearing from students that feel a connection with Israel and they're very upset with events on campus. And guess what this guy cites from Hillel chapters. And guess what? Hillel is a little bit under scandal because their chapter operating at UBC, they were caught trying to smear a social justice collective or student organization, supposedly saying that they were in favor of Hamas, Palestinian liberation. And I mean, to say that you're saying that Palestinian liberation is not a bad thing at all, no. But for these students, that would be something they'd fear deeply and they could fear repression. So that's what they were trying to do. The Zionists in the Hillel chapter were trying to gin up oppression. And that's one of the major sources, and that's one of the Housefather's major concerns. So this guy, Housefather, is a hardcore Zionist, and these moves targeting, there's more on the targeting of my generation, but I want to give you a bit of a chance to speak, Laith.
Yeah, I mean, look, I personally call him hose feather, not Housefather. He is definitely the leading Jewish white supremacist in the Parliament of Canada, and I think it's very good for us to understand what these Jewish white supremacists are trying to do here and where we're heading, because I think we're already almost at the stage of the Vietnam era repression on campus. We already saw the shooting of 3 Palestinian American students in Boston area. We saw the armed and violent repression of student groups on campus in the United States and Canada. And we're seeing more and more repression by the police, the mass arrests that are happening in the Toronto area or in the Calgary area of organizers of demonstrations. So now we had the vote in the United States in the Congress that equates anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. This happened already in Canada multiple times. And what does this mean? That means that the Western government in general had for a long time claimed to be secular societies with a separation between religion and state. Of course, when you study that a little bit, deeper, even without talking about Palestine, you discover that that's not true. But let's take them at face value. This idea that societies in the West, governments in the West are secular. Well, right now we have laws on books in Canada that allow you to make fun of and denigrate every religion. That's your right of speech, including, the hate speech laws allow you to criticize any religion you want to, make fun of any prophet, including Jewish religion and Jewish prophets. But you cannot criticize the state of Israel or the political ideology of Zionism under threat of being excommunicated out of society, with your livelihood destroyed, and even possibility of jail time, as is happening in Germany, and or death, as is happening in the United States, and it's going to become more. So what does this mean? It means the official religion of Canada now is Zionism. Okay? This is the dogma that you're not allowed to question. And people like Anthony Housefather are the leaders of this. In terms of academic freedoms, it's gone. It was already, these threats of cutting money for universities happened 20 years ago when we were involved at Concordia University, York, U of T, all of that. I mean, at one point after we shut down Netanyahu in 2002, the Zionists were able to practically bring down the amount of donations coming on a monthly basis to zero to Concordia. The late president of Concordia University, Frederick Louis, went and kissed their feet, basically, to get the money back flowing into the university. And they had already put in, laws from 20 years ago that make it possible for the university administrations to expel summarily students that criticize Israel with no internal trials or anything like that, or a right to respond to your accusations and so forth. That's happening. The mass arrests of multiple professors in the Toronto area over the last few weeks show us that even academic freedoms for professors are now stripped. And as this war expands, this is a warning to all of the Palestinian, Arab, Muslim communities, and those who stand for the liberation of Palestine, no matter what their ethnic background is in Canada. If this war expands, which it is going to be expanding, and Canadian forces, there's around 4,000 Canadian forces on the ground in Palestine. The Canadian task force, the two that fought in Afghanistan, are inside Palestine. And so if these troops start dying in a direct war, and and the Canadian government sees that the population is against its military, it is very likely that we will hear martial law being implemented. It's very likely that actually Palestinian Arab and Muslim communities will be rounded like the Japanese Canadians during World War II and put into concentration camps. And so our communities have to be ready for that. And believe me, reading these articles that we're reading in the Canadian media, like this, the stuff that Anthony Housefeather basically wrote, it's preparing the government for that. We already read so many requests for martial law to stop the demonstrations. And the Canadian media is preparing us for this possibility because the Zionist colony is going to...
Wait. Martial law? I haven't seen requests for martial law. I've seen a lot of requests for crackdowns, and I've seen a lot of requests for supposed, hate speech and incitement around supporting Palestinian liberation. But martial law is something I haven't seen. Can you explain that a little more?
Yeah, in the UK and France, there's been calls for the implementation of martial law, and I'm just generalizing for all the Western societies because it's all the same, and whatever happens in any of these countries gets copied very fast in the other countries.
Okay, so you were making that point though. Please continue with that.
Yeah, so I believe that there's a big threat possibility of these communities being targeted for roundups and internment camps, as happened in World War II in the Japanese Canadian and Japanese American societies, especially if this war expands to a wider regional configuration and more Western troops die directly in it.
All right, well, that's some heavy stuff, but we have more to get to. And I was going to talk about the vote at the UN General Assembly, but I'll just very quickly run over it. In that Canada tried to get amendments attacking Palestinian resistance, those failed. Then Canada still voted for the resolution that was calling for a ceasefire. That's basically the extent of it there. But the big thing, and speaking on what you believe is a push towards martial law, I've certainly seen this ginning up of animus towards Palestinians and the building of attempts to build public acceptance of violent, vicious crackdowns on Palestine liberation organizing. You're seeing, and I think one of the big culprits of that, along with Housefather, is a certain independent MP, Kevin Wong, and I've been on this guy for a long while, pretty much the whole year or so. This man is just brazen and vile. I can't put him any other way. This guy covered up a sexual assault charge, not a conviction, a charge that he faced, and that charge he ended up getting that was came out to the public. He got booted from the Liberals, but he still narrowly managed to win the Spadina Fort York riding. And then this guy was desperate. He's a political opportunist. He actually expressed pride at his late uncle's service in the army of the US-backed South Vietnamese puppet regime. This is a brutal, brutal regime, and he's proud of this. He's a proud anti-communist. He's a proud colonialist. And he was the one who jumped really hard on the Chinagate narrative because this man needs a political home. This man is already a rabid anti-communist, a colonialist, and he'll do whatever it takes. And he'll be the useful idiot, the servant of CSIS and our Canadian elite. And now he's escalated further. By he's joined forces. He's allied with JDL, Jewish Defense League thug, Maro Weinstein. And Maro Weinstein's an outright thug. This man is a physical danger. This was a guy who was, I saw he was doing these kind of gun safety lessons, which, I mean, obviously, I'm not saying that I have proof of anything more malicious from that, but the way he's talking about the Jewish, like the quote unquote Jewish community, which he really means Zionists, needing to be defended and be prepared to defend themselves. It's the kind of, it's the kind of extreme, like, fascist rhetoric of, look, they're not saying that to defend themselves. They're saying that to target Arabs, about Arab Canadians, Palestinian Canadians, anyone who stands really in solidarity with Palestine more broadly. And so where Wong comes in is there's a protest actions around MP's offices on the 18th of December. And one Mayor Weinstein said, and I quote, I'm not saying this myself, quote, Toronto pro-Hamas gangs plan to target and threaten MP Kevin Wong. And you want to know who quote tweeted that? One Kevin Wong, who said, I won't be intimidated from standing up against hate. Violent acts of hatred on the street, yada, yada, yada. Rule of law must prevail, not mob rule. So that's Kevin Wong allying with Maro Weinstein. Maro Weinstein himself has gone even further. And wouldn't you know, one Toronto Sun columnist, Joe Warmington, retweeted a post by Maro Weinstein demanding that Canadian citizens make citizens arrests of quote unquote violent Hamas supporters. This is around a protest on December 23rd. So, you have Kevin Wong, and then you have another one of the faces of these rabid opportunist colonialist types That is one MPP in Ontario, Goldie Gamari of the Progressive Conservatives, who her rhetoric is just very vile. She's pro Israel. Of course, she wants regime change in Iran. More than anything, though, with Gamari, I think the unifying point that people will hate, regardless of the political spectrum within the left, is Gamari has sought and cheered on prosecutions and targeting of Palestine protesters, really attempting to incite the prosecutions as well. So you have, and was with Gamari, right? Gamari got her law license suspended because she just dipped on a client out of the blue for political expediency before she got into politics. So you have Wong with all of his covering up of things. And by the way, with Wong and Chinagate, part of the reason why he got into Chinagate in the first place was because he tried to claim that the Chinese were behind, this charge that he faced. It was all a Chinese plot. These are vile, deranged colonialists, absolute vile opportunists that are endangering Canadian people. They're endangering them. And so I have nothing but ill will for them. And I could go on a whole nother thing about Sam Cooper. He's another one of this ilk. Whatever CSIS or National Security Community in North America says is the holy, unbroken truth. This guy's calling for imposition of racketeering law in Canada to target pro-Palestine protests. And I'm sure you know about how in Cop City, opposition to it in Atlanta, it's RICO, the racketeering law that they're using to target it. So I'm seeing my generation getting full scale attacked. They're getting attacked. Cooper's calling for people to be held accountable for education of college students. I mean, this Cooper guy loves repression too. Chinese communities, Chinese Canadian organizations in Quebec, they're unhappy about being named in an investigation by the RCMP, which hasn't moved at all in the last couple of months. Cooper wanted to prevent them from suing and force them to go through a national security court. So Cooper is very much an advocate of attacking whatever quote unquote democratic rights we have in here. This guy is very tied to the intelligence communities in North America because of how reliant he is on them and their word and their reporting as his sources. And these are the kind of people, the rabid opportunists that are attacking this Palestine solidarity. And these kind of actions, like, I'm not sure if I see martial law in the same way that you do, but I'm also not going to say that it wouldn't happen. I'm not going to say that it wouldn't happen. I definitely think the Canadian state would be willing to if it feels desperate enough. And so it's a dangerous situation. It really is. But let's shift on to the more positive side of things, which is Canadians opposing Canada's support for the Zionist colony over these last 2 weeks. I think we can start off really around the December 10th. There was the International Human Rights Day action. You had ILPS, I believe it was the Toronto branch, Palestine Youth Movement, and some other organizations. They did one protest at it was the U.S. consulate in Toronto. I was there for that. That event got disrupted because Toronto police targeted a protester, arrested him pretty violently, and then took him to the 52nd Division in Toronto. So you had people go there. And then you had another protest starting at the same time, led by Toronto for Palestine. And they had larger numbers than the ILPS Toronto protest. The Palestine, they had a couple thousand. And they ended up joining at the 52nd Division to stand in solidarity, and the person was released after a couple of hours. So that was what happened on the 10th. You had a rally, Nathan Phillips Square in Toronto, December 17th. A whole brouhaha about a Zara store being targeted. You had Palestine protests at these MPs' offices in GTA, in across Canada, Quebec. You had British Columbia and other spots. And of course, they had a protest at one Kevin Vuong's office. Wong and these other MPs fled. They weren't at their offices on the day, claiming some crappy security threats, which were really non-existent. There was a bit of a brouhaha at the Kevin Wong one because you had one of these people that wants Iran regime change, seemingly harassing and targeting, being nasty towards other protesters, Salman Sima, and then playing the victim as well, which is just really no surprise. Zionists love playing the victim. And then you have this upcoming, and I think this will be funny for you, Laith, upcoming December 23rd protest, Young Dundas Square. It's all about no Christmas as usual, and the right-wingers are crying about attacks on Christmas. And of course, it's a completely deranged Zionist thing to push that narrative, because what's happening to Christmas in Palestine? What's happening, even for Lebanon to a certain degree with the attacks that is faced from the Zionist entity, Yemen and so forth, right? So why don't you go on that a little?
Yeah, the actions and the reaction to them, I think, gives us indication of where we're going, because just like what's happening on the ground here in Palestine and in the region is at a higher stage of violence and repression than it was 20 years ago during the Second Intifada. Clearly, the actions of Palestinians and their supporters in the communities in the diaspora are getting also cannot be the same things that we did 20 years ago. And certainly the response of the Zionists, the failed response of the Zionists from 20 years ago to repress support for Palestine and in the universities and across in the public, Canadian public, they're going to have to, become more oppressive in their response, because they can't repeat something that they did 20 years ago. This is why I think the things that they did 20 years ago in terms of cutting the funding for universities, expelling professors, expelling students, de-ratifying student unions, that's going to happen very much faster than it happened 20 years ago.
You're seeing right now, you've seen these targeting of student associations, especially Martadu Mukyaba for Canfiles has reported on the targeting of these York University student associations. You see it to a certain degree with that Hillel chapter that operates at UBC, trying to target organization around student union and social justice and so forth. You certainly see it very actively, yes.
Yeah, so it's happening, and it's happening fast, because they have to go through the things that they did 20 years ago fast, so they can get to the next stages that they have in mind. And this is where I think, because clearly also now the vast majority of the Canadian population is pro-Palestinian liberation, it's anti-Zionist. Even the surveys done a few days ago of American populists showed that the youth under 25 are 2/3 of them basically say that Israel has no right to exist and should be given back to the Palestinians as a solution.
That's what Sam Cooper, that reporter that I have a real issue with, melted down about.
Yes. Yeah. So this means that all their reactions from 20 years ago are irrelevant. They can't replay that strategy and think that there's going to be a different outcome. The Palestinian population or the Palestinian positionality has won on campus already. So what are they going to do? They have to go further than they did last time. And it's clearly right now, as this attachment from the positions and opinions of the public being detached from the positions and actions of the state in such a flagrant way, or the elected officials, is threatening civil cohesion of the state itself, Canada, or the United States, or all these Western countries. So it's now pitting the state and all of its apparatuses is against the population. And in countries that have elections coming up, like the United States, in the next 11 months, we'll have a presidential election. This is going to be a question that will haunt that country before the election comes. Who's going to represent the vast majority of Americans who are anti-Zionist? And how is that going to affect the outcome of this election? In Canada, as these contradictions become more and more violent, and the repression becomes more violent, and the issues like the indigenous population, I mean, the indigenous population right now is almost 100% pro-Palestinian. I mean, that took 20 years of collaborations and education and so on, cross pollination between the communities, indigenous and Palestinian. But that's now an eternal position. You can't go back on that. You can't re-educate the indigenous people and make them pro-Israel. That's now a done deal. So, these questions are at the core of the stability of the state. And this is why I believe that we are heading to more repression, to the point of internment camps, especially if this war continues to grow. And we see hundreds of Western troops coming back in body bags.
All right, thanks, Laith. Now, I believe there's one more point I want to mention, which is simply the organizing of Sami Doon. They're big in British Columbia. They have operations very much in Canada, and of course, they've been very viciously targeted in Germany. So I just wanted to mention that they are certainly keeping up their organizing in British Columbia, though for people in the GTA or Ontario might not be as familiar, simply because their operations aren't really mainly here. So get up to them. Get up to them. And on that point, I'm going to leave it there, Laith. We've gone for more than an hour. I think it's been very educational for people. So Laith, thanks for joining for the Canada Files, co-hosting this new series. And folks, you will see another episode coming out around 2 weeks. This will be a bi-weekly show. Thanks everyone for watching, and thanks again, Laith, for being the co-host of this.
You have a great evening.